Have you ever watched a silver spoon heir burn his own family empire down while you just sip black coffee? I never planned to destroy him. I simply smiled, took one step back, and let him and human resources tie their own nooses trying to fire me. If you think corporate is where the strong eat the weak, you are wrong. It is just where the stupid get swallowed by their own arrogance. Hello, wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. I want to speak to you genuinely for a moment, because YouTube recently disabled our monetization, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to keep this channel alive. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to feed their families and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment of this video. Thank you so much. My name is Aria Ramos. I am 34 years old, and I am the lead data security architect at Ethelgard Data Solutions, a massive medical software company based out of Austin, Texas. I am not the type of female executive who posts inspirational morning routine quotes on the internet. I do not care about building a bubbly corporate culture, and I certainly do not care about making my coworkers feel warm and fuzzy inside. My job description is brutally simple, yet the execution requires absolute perfection. My sole purpose in this company is to keep the Federal Bureau of Investigation from kicking down our glass doors and dragging our executives away in handcuffs for violating the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. In the medical data industry, you are handling the most intimate details of people's lives. A single slip-up, a single unauthorized access log, means millions of dollars in federal fines. It means lawsuits that can wipe an entire corporation off the map. I am the person who cleans up the digital garbage left behind by careless developers, ensuring none of it leaks into the public domain. For 8 grueling years, I maintained a flawless, 0% data leak record. You do not achieve that kind of perfection by being nice. You achieve it by being ruthless. I operated in complete silence, governed entirely by strict principles and uncompromising rules. When I first took this job, Ethelgard's network was a fragile, outdated joke. It was a digital sieve, just waiting to be exploited by the most basic ransomware attack, line of code by line of code, server by server. I tore that pathetic infrastructure to the ground and rebuilt it into an impenetrable digital fortress. I revoked administrative privileges from senior managers who did not need them. I locked down databases with encryption keys so complex it would take a supercomputer 1,000 years to crack them. My department was a well-oiled, perfectly silent machine. Peace is the ultimate goal of a security architect. However, that hard-earned peace was violently ripped to shreds on a Tuesday morning when a company-wide email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line glowed with toxic corporate positivity, welcoming our new Chief Innovation Officer to break traditional technological boundaries. In my line of work, reading the phrase "break boundaries" is like hearing a fire alarm go off in an oil refinery. It is never a good thing. In corporate language, an executive who wants to disrupt the market is usually just an idiot who wants to ignore federal privacy regulations to make a quick buck. My stomach tightened as I clicked open the email to see the face of our new visionary. The man grinning back at me from the screen was Julian Thorne. He was exactly 28 years old, sporting a perfectly messy haircut that probably cost $500 to look like he just rolled out of bed. More importantly, he was the beloved son of our Chief Executive Officer, Marcus Thorne. Julian did not have a master's degree in cybersecurity. He did not have a decade of experience handling sensitive medical infrastructure. What he did have was a spectacular, highly publicized record of failure just 8 months prior. Julian had completely bankrupted a flashy cryptocurrency startup. He had burned through $50 million of venture capital funding to produce a digital product that was entirely worthless. Any normal person would have been blacklisted from the tech industry for such a catastrophic failure. But when your father owns the chessboard, you do not get eliminated from the game. You just get promoted to a different piece. Instead of letting his son face the harsh reality of his own incompetence, Marcus Thorne created a brand new, highly lucrative executive position right here at Ethelgard just for him. He bought his golden boy a high-level power seat, a six-figure salary, and a mandate to innovate. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and took a sip of my black coffee. Staring at the screen, I knew instantly that this silver spoon heir was a walking disaster. He was arrogant, uneducated in our specific compliance laws, and armed with unearned authority. I did not know it at that exact moment, but Julian was about to test the very limits of my patience, and I was going to let his own unchecked ego destroy him. Julian made his grand entrance on a Monday. He strolled into the executive suite wearing a meticulously wrinkled vintage band t-shirt, tailored sweatpants, and pristine white sneakers that probably cost more than most of my junior developers made in an entire month. He was the living, breathing embodiment of tech bro culture. A guy who believed that not wearing a tie automatically made him a visionary genius. Within his first 48 hours, the office was drowning in his exhausting vocabulary. He paced around the open-plan floor, aggressively using words like agile, disrupt, pivot, and data monetization. He sounded like a walking internet business article. I watched him corner a terrified database engineer near the water cooler, passionately gesturing with his hands as he talked about synergizing the cloud architecture, completely oblivious to the fact that he was putting technical verbs next to nouns that had absolutely no business being together. The man could not read a single line of code if his life depended on it, but he walked around acting like he had personally invented the internet. The real nightmare began exactly 2 weeks into his tenure during a mandatory quarterly board meeting. The room was packed with senior stakeholders, investors, and his father, Marcus, beaming with grotesque pride at the head of the heavy mahogany table. Julian stood in front of a massive digital projector and unveiled his masterstroke. Project Prometheus. It was an artificial intelligence algorithm designed to automatically scrape our entire database of user medical records, analyze their pre-existing conditions, and cross-sell that highly sensitive health data to third-party pharmaceutical companies for targeted advertising. He pitched it as the ultimate revenue stream, promising a profit increase of over 400% within the first 18 months. I sat there, my hands resting perfectly still on the polished wood. I looked around the room. A few of the older board members were nodding, mesmerized by the glowing financial projections. They were seeing dollar signs. I was seeing federal prison bars. Julian wrapped up his presentation with a dramatic pause. "This is how we disrupt the healthcare space," he declared, grinning like he had just cured a rare disease rather than proposed a massive corporate crime. "Any questions?" I slowly leaned forward to my microphone. The click of the button echoed loudly in the sudden silence. "Yes, Julian," I said, my voice entirely flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. "I have one question. Have you ever read Title II of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996? Julian blinked, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Arya, we need to think beyond the legacy constraints. Compliance is important, but we are talking about an agile paradigm shift here." "A paradigm shift," I repeated. "That is an interesting way to describe a class action lawsuit. Selling identifiable patient medical history to pharmaceutical companies without explicit documented patient consent is a direct violation of federal law. Specifically, the privacy rule. The maximum penalty is $50,000 per violation, up to $1,500,000 per year for each identical provision violated, along with potential criminal charges carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison." I paused, locking my eyes entirely on his. "So, unless your agile paradigm shift includes a budget for our commissary accounts at a maximum security penitentiary, Project Prometheus is dead on arrival. Security vetoes it." The boardroom descended into a suffocating, awkward silence. The investors shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson, while Julian just stood there, his face completely devoid of color, utterly humiliated in front of the very people he was trying to impress. I had not just popped his balloon. I had incinerated it with cold, unfeeling legal facts. Instead of taking the loss and consulting my team to find a legal, secure alternative, Julian's massive ego went into overdrive. He immediately decided that I was not a guardian of the company, but an enemy of progress. Since he could not win a logical debate with me, he resorted to the tactics of a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. He started deliberately bypassing me. He would physically avoid my office and instead corner my young, inexperienced junior developers at their desks, giving them direct, unauthorized orders to build out the artificial intelligence scraping tools on unmonitored shadow servers. He even took to the company's internal messaging system to mock me. He posted in a public engineering channel, tagging me directly. "Hey Arya, we need to move fast and break things. Your turtle mindset is suffocating the innovation pipeline. Try to keep up." Most people would have marched straight into human resources to file a formal complaint. Others would have started screaming matches in the hallways. I did neither. Arguing with an idiot only proves that there are two idiots in the room. Instead, I simply smiled at my monitor. I opened a deeply hidden directory on my encrypted local drive and created a brand new, password-protected folder. I named it Disaster Protocol. Every time Julian sent a coercive message bullying a junior developer to ignore standard security protocols, I took a screenshot and dropped it into the folder. Every time he sent an email demanding a bypass of the firewall for his untested code, I saved the raw email file into the folder. Every single time I sent him an official, documented warning about the catastrophic security vulnerabilities in his unapproved models, and he replied with a mocking dismissal. It went straight into the folder. He thought he was isolating me. He thought he was proving his dominance over the department. He did not realize that I was not retreating. I was just quietly feeding him the slack, measuring it out inch by inch, and waiting for the exact moment he hopelessly tangled himself in his own undoing. The atmosphere in the office shifted from merely annoying to completely suffocating. It felt like breathing underwater in a locked cage. Enter Chloe, the Director of Human Resources. Chloe was a professional sycophant, a woman who had built her entire lucrative career by nodding enthusiastically at whatever the chief executive officer said. Marcus Thorne needed a corporate hitman in a pencil skirt to protect his incompetent son, and Chloe was more than happy to oblige. She suddenly started initiating mandatory, one-on-one culture check-in meetings. Strangely, these highly unusual meetings were exclusively targeted at my data security department. I knew exactly what was happening when my engineers started coming back to their desks, looking visibly stressed, avoiding my gaze, and typing nervously. Chloe was not asking them about their current workload or their mental health. She was feeding them aggressive, carefully constructed leading questions. Do you feel like Arya's rigid rules stifle your personal growth? Is Arya creating a hostile work environment by consistently rejecting your innovative ideas? She was desperately trying to manufacture a mutiny from thin air. She was digging for any stray quote, any slight grumble or complaint she could twist into a formal, documented grievance against me. Meanwhile, Julian realized that playing the untouchable alpha male was not working against my cold, irrefutable logic, so he executed a sudden, nauseating pivot. He became the ultimate victim. During the weekly cross-departmental syncs, he would slump dramatically in his expensive ergonomic chair, sigh heavily, and rub his temples as if he were carrying the weight of the entire tech industry on his shoulders. He started dropping buzzwords of an entirely different kind. He explicitly told the marketing and engineering leads that my management style was toxic and inherently hostile. He lamented, almost with actual tears in his eyes, that his brilliant creative vision was being mercilessly suffocated by my aggressive gatekeeping. It was a flawless masterclass in corporate gaslighting. He painted himself as the passionate, forward-thinking innovator being relentlessly bullied by the mean, unreasonable security lady, and because his last name was printed on the front of the building, the spineless middle management team ate it right up. They nodded in deep sympathy, shooting me sideways glances filled with quiet, cowardly judgment. The systemic power of the entire corporation was closing ranks around the golden boy. building a massive protective wall of lies to shield his sheer incompetence. The retaliation escalated very quickly from passive-aggressive office politics to overtly operational sabotage. Suddenly, the calendar invites for the crucial system architecture meeting stopped appearing in my inbox when I directly questioned the project managers about the sudden exclusion. They looked at the floor and mumbled something vague about the meetings being restricted to core innovation personnel only. Then, the real devastating blow landed. On a Thursday afternoon, I tried to log into the staging servers for his artificial intelligence project to run my standard, required weekly vulnerability scans. A cold, red error message flashed across my secondary screen. Access denied. Privilege level insufficient. I stared at the notification, my jaw clenching so hard my back teeth ached. They had actually downgraded the administrative rights of the lead security architect. They were literally locking the watchman out of the tower so the thieves could loot the castle in absolute peace. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the move was almost physically heavy. They were deliberately blinding the only person in the entire building who could stop a catastrophic federal data breach. The pressure cooker finally whistled late one evening. Most of the floor had completely cleared out when Elena, a brilliant 22-year-old junior developer I had personally mentored since her first day, slipped into my office. She closed the heavy glass door behind her and immediately burst into uncontrollable tears. She was shaking violently, clutching a thick, printed stack of internal emails to her chest like a physical shield. I stood up, walked over, and gently pulled the window blinds shut to block the view from the empty hallway. I asked her in a low voice what was wrong. She looked up at me with terrified, red eyes. "Arya, they are going to fire you," she whispered, her voice cracking with sheer panic. Julian forced me to help integrate the new data scraping module into the main production server. When I told him it lacked basic encryption protocols, he yelled at me in front of everyone. Then I saw an email thread he accidentally left open on his unlocked terminal. It was between him and Chloe from Human Resources. "They are building a massive, fake disciplinary dossier on you. They are planning to terminate you for cause next Friday, exactly 2 days before the official launch of the artificial intelligence project, so you cannot block the deployment." She handed me the crumpled, still warm, printed papers. I scanned the pages quickly but thoroughly. It was all right there in black and white. Fabricated complaints from anonymous sources, wildly exaggerated accounts of my alleged hostility, and a meticulously planned, day-by-day timeline for my forced dismissal. They were not just going to push me out the door, they were going to completely ruin my professional reputation to justify the termination to the board. Elena was sobbing loudly now, absolutely terrified she would be fired and blacklisted from the tech industry for showing me this highly confidential communication. I handed the papers back to her, my facial expression completely unchanged, my resting heart rate entirely steady. "Put these in the shredder immediately, Elena," I said calmly. "Go home. Get some sleep. Do not say a single word to anyone about this. You have done absolutely nothing wrong." After she left, I sat completely alone in the dim blue light of my dual monitors. The average person would have panicked. They would have marched straight into the executive suite waving threats of wrongful termination lawsuits, or desperately tried to fix the gaping security holes Julian was tearing into our infrastructure just to prove their indispensable worth to the company. But staring at the glowing screen, a profound, chilling clarity washed over my entire body. If I fought them right now, I would just be a disgruntled, paranoid employee yelling at a brick wall. They had the chief executive officer, they had human resources, and they controlled the entire corporate narrative. I was standing directly in front of a speeding freight train, frantically trying to build a tiny wooden barrier to stop it. So, I decided to do the absolute most dangerous thing a cybersecurity expert can possibly do. I decided to step completely off the tracks and let the train derail itself. I immediately initiated a strategy of absolute, malicious compliance. I stopped sending urgent warning emails. I stopped filing mandatory risk assessment reports. when Julian's overworked team submitted incredibly sloppy, unencrypted code for the artificial intelligence model. I did not reject it. I did not flag the vulnerabilities. I just approved it and let it pass straight through the deployment pipeline. I completely withdrew my invisible protective shield. If Julian wanted to play with a lit blowtorch in a room completely filled to the ceiling with gasoline, who was I to blow out the flame? I was going to let him install a massive, unmitigated ticking time bomb directly into the company's central data center. I was going to let him plug it in, set the timer, and walk away feeling like an absolute genius. I leaned back in the dark silence of my office, a cold, predatory smile slowly forming on my lips. The trap was perfectly set, but it was not my trap. It was theirs. And they were sprinting blindly right into it. At exactly 2:15 on a Wednesday afternoon, an urgent calendar invite bypassed my inbox and forcefully inserted itself directly onto my schedule. The location was Conference Room 4, one of the windowless, frosted glass interrogation cubes tucked away in the deepest corner of the executive suite. There was no agenda attached. There were no prior warnings. This was the classic corporate ambush. I locked my workstation, stood up, and walked down the long, carpeted hallway. My pulse remained perfectly flat. I knew exactly what was waiting for me behind that heavy oak door. I pushed the door open. The air conditioning in the room was turned down so low it felt like a meat locker. Sitting on one side of the sleek, black marble table was Chloe, her hands folded neatly over a pristine manila folder. Sitting right next to her, slouched back, with his legs crossed, and a sickeningly triumphant smirk plastered across his face, was Julian. He looked like a teenager who had just successfully framed his older sibling for breaking a vase. "Please have a seat, Arya," Chloe said, deploying that soft, artificially soothing voice human resources professionals use right before they try to destroy your livelihood. I sat down slowly, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my hands resting flat on the cold marble. I did not say a word. I just stared at them, letting the silence stretch out until Chloe was forced to break it. "Arya, we are having this meeting today because a highly concerning formal grievance has been filed against you," Chloe began, tapping her manicured fingernail against the folder. "Julian has officially submitted a claim of severe workplace harassment." I did not blink. I slowly turned my gaze to Julian. He shifted his posture, suddenly trying to look solemn and wounded, but his eyes were practically dancing with glee. "According to the documentation," Chloe continued, opening the folder and reading from a freshly printed sheet, "your management style has been classified as aggressively exclusionary. Julian has detailed multiple instances where your strict supervision, your constant rejection of his code, and your generally hostile attitude have caused him profound psychological trauma. He states that your actions have systematically undermined his authority, deliberately stifled his creative process, and made him feel profoundly inferior in his role as Chief Innovation Officer." It was a breathtakingly absurd accusation. The multi-millionaire heir to the company, the man who had spent the last month bullying junior staff and willfully ignoring federal law, was now sitting in a climate-controlled room claiming that my compliance checks had hurt his feelings. It was a complete weaponization of corporate wellness language, twisted to protect a predator from his own incompetence. "Because Ethelgard takes employee mental health and workplace hostility very seriously," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave to convey false gravity. "We have to take immediate action to protect our staff. Given your senior position, an extensive, prolonged internal investigation would be highly disruptive to the entire engineering department. However, the executive team wants to handle this gracefully." Chloe reached into the folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, cream-colored paper. She slid them across the smooth marble table until they rested directly in front of me. Sitting right on top was a letter of immediate resignation, and beneath it, a remarkably dense non-disclosure agreement. "We are offering you a clean exit," Chloe explained, smiling warmly now. "If you sign the resignation letter today, we will officially classify this as a voluntary departure. We will bury the harassment claim entirely. Your professional record will remain completely spotless. In addition, as a gesture of goodwill for your past 8 years of service, the company will provide you with a severance package equal to 3 months of your base salary, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreement and agree never to discuss the internal operations of Ethelgard or this specific incident with anyone. It was the ultimate trap. If I signed it, I would be admitting defeat. I would be locked into silence, paid off with 3 months of hush money, while Julian would be free to launch his catastrophic artificial intelligence project without a single obstacle in his way. They expected me to panic. They expected me to be terrified of having a harassment claim permanently stain my resume. They expected me to snatch the pen and sign my life away just to escape the pressure. I looked down at the documents. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not even lean forward. The emotional part of my brain was completely shut off, replaced by the cold, calculating logic of a chess grandmaster seeing the final board state. I reached out with one finger and deliberately pushed the stack of papers back across the table until it bumped against Chloe's hands. "I will not resign," I said, my voice as hard and flat as the marble table. "I absolutely deny these fabricated allegations. I want a full, documented internal investigation. Therefore, I formally accept an immediate administrative suspension pending the final results of that investigation." The warm, patronizing smile instantly vanished from Chloe's face. She looked genuinely shocked, her mouth slightly open. Julian, however, let out a loud, mocking laugh. He leaned forward, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "You are actually going to drag this out?" Julian sneered, clearly thinking I had just made the stupidest mistake of my life. "You want to be suspended? Fine. Have it your way. You are officially locked out of the building. Have fun sitting at home while we launch the project without you." He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he could not see the massive, steel jaws of the trap snapping shut completely around him. He thought I had just given up. He thought he had broken me. What Julian and Chloe entirely failed to understand was the binding legal nature of an involuntary administrative suspension. By refusing to resign and forcing them to suspend me, I was forcing human resources to generate an official, legally binding document stripping me of my system intervention rights. They were putting it in writing that I was explicitly forbidden from accessing the servers, monitoring the code, or intervening in any company operations starting at this exact minute. That suspension notice was not a punishment. It was my impenetrable shield. They had just officially, legally absolved me of any and all liability for the colossal, company-destroying disaster that Julian was about to unleash. I stood up from the table, smoothed out my jacket, and walked out of the room, leaving them to sign their own death warrants. That very night, the moment I walked into my apartment, I locked the deadbolt and brewed a fresh pot of black coffee. I did not turn on the television. I did not take a moment to decompress. The clock was ticking, and I had exactly one window of opportunity before the company realized what was actually happening. I booted up my personal, heavily encrypted laptop and routed my internet connection through a secure protocol bouncing across multiple international servers. I opened a clean browser window and navigated directly to the secure, anonymous whistleblower intake portal of the Federal Trade Commission. I sat in the glow of my screen and carefully attached the entire compressed file of the disaster protocol. It was a massive payload of undeniable digital proof. I uploaded every single screenshot of Julian ordering engineers to bypass security. I uploaded the network logs, showing my firewall warnings being manually overridden by his unauthorized administrative account. I uploaded the detailed timeline of human resources, suddenly launching their bogus cultural surveys exactly 2 days after I vetoed his illegal project. I filled out the federal intake forms with absolute, surgical precision, explicitly detailing the impending mass theft of patient medical data. I hit submit. The progress bar crawled across the screen, a digital fuse slowly burning toward the powder keg. This was the brilliant, brutal legal twist that Chloe and her team of corporate sycophants had completely failed to anticipate. By waiting for them to officially suspend me on a fabricated retaliatory harassment charge, before I submitted the evidence to the federal government. I had triggered the ultimate legal failsafe. The Federal Whistleblower Protection Act was now officially activated. I was no longer just a suspended security architect. I was a fully protected federal witness reporting a massive corporate crime. Because they had already suspended me to silence me, the government would immediately view their disciplinary actions as illegal retaliation. I was untouchable. The next morning dawned bright and clear in Texas, at exactly 9 o'clock. Completely unrestrained by my security protocols and entirely blind to the catastrophic flaws in his own unreviewed code, Julian proudly pressed the launch button. He officially deployed the beta version of his artificial intelligence data scraping tool to the live networks of the 3 largest hospital chains in the state. He actually had the marketing department send out a company-wide blast celebrating his visionary milestone. I knew all of this because Elena was desperately giving me real-time updates through a highly encrypted mobile messaging application from her desk. Then, the countdown began. The system operated exactly as Julian had poorly designed it. It was aggressive, fast, and entirely devoid of any safety checks. Without my encryption gates and traffic monitors actively filtering the outgoing data streams, the artificial intelligence behaved like a wild animal let loose in a library. It frantically scraped the hospital databases, pulling everything it could grab. It took exactly 4 hours for the entire empire to catch fire. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Elena sent me a single, terrified message. "Oh my God, the server!" Julian's unvetted, sloppy code had a massive logic error in its routing protocol. Instead of carefully analyzing the patient data and securely funneling it to the private, encrypted servers of their pharmaceutical partners, the artificial intelligence panicked. It bypassed the disabled firewalls and automatically dumped its raw, unencrypted output directly onto a completely unsecured, public-facing cloud storage bucket. It was basically uploading the data to a digital billboard on the side of a busy highway. In a matter of minutes, the system hemorrhaged over 50,000 highly sensitive, completely unredacted medical records onto the open internet. We are not just talking about billing zip codes. The leak included full patient names, physical home addresses, terminal cancer diagnoses, deeply private psychiatric evaluations, and detailed prescription histories. More than 50,000 innocent lives were suddenly exposed to anyone with a basic internet connection. The sheer scale of the federal violation was astronomical. Under the law, each individual leaked record carried a maximum penalty of $50,000. The liability was instantly compounding into the billions. Inside the Ethelgard headquarters, absolute, unfiltered panic erupted. Elena described the scene as total chaos. Alarms that I had installed years ago, the ones Julian had forgotten to disable, began screaming through the engineering floor. Developers were frantically sprinting down the hallways. Red emergency lights were flashing in the server rooms. Middle managers were shouting over each other, desperately trying to pull the physical server plugs from the walls to stop the hemorrhage. But the damage was already done. The data was out there. I sat on my living room couch, sipping my coffee, watching the digital readouts Elena managed to send me. I felt no panic. I felt no pity. I just listened to the silence of my apartment, knowing that across the city, the golden boy had just burned his father's entire legacy to ashes. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, an emergency. Mandatory session of the board of directors was forcefully convened. The fallout was apocalyptic. The legal departments of the 3 major Texas hospital chains had already issued immediate cease and desist orders, completely freezing our operations, and were officially preparing lawsuits totaling multiple billions of dollars. Standing at the head of the long mahogany table, Marcus Thorne was drenched in a cold sweat. His face was purple with rage as he desperately tried to rewrite history in real time. He was frantically shouting at the remaining, terrified middle managers, aggressively demanding to know how the security department had allowed this massive failure to happen. He was trying to build a scapegoat out of thin air to save his golden boy. He never got the chance. The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom did not just open, they were shoved open with absolute, undeniable authority. The shouting abruptly stopped. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. 3 special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, wearing tactical windbreakers, strode directly into the room, flanked by a senior inspector from the Federal Trade Commission. The lead agent held up a thick, legally binding document. It was a federal search and seizure warrant for the entire building. The boardroom descended into a stunned, breathless silence. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. Julian shrank back into his expensive leather chair, all the arrogant tech bro energy completely draining from his body. Then, I walked through the door right behind the federal agents. I was not wearing the defeated expression of a suspended, disgraced employee. I was wearing a sharply tailored suit, my posture perfectly straight, carrying the undeniable weight of a protected federal witness. The collective gasp from the executives was audible. I walked with slow, deliberate steps right up to the center of the massive marble table. I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out the exact same manila folder Chloe had tried to force me to sign yesterday, and dropped it onto the polished wood. The heavy smack of the paper echoed through the dead silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I said, my voice completely steady and cutting through the tension like a knife. "What you are looking at is a fabricated disciplinary file. Yesterday afternoon, your chief executive officer and your director of human resources used this fake harassment claim to officially suspend my system access. They deliberately removed the only certified data security architect in this building who could have stopped this catastrophic breach, specifically so Julian Thorne could illegally launch a data scraping algorithm without federal compliance checks. This folder is not just an employment dispute, it is documented. Written proof of a corporate conspiracy to commit federal data fraud." The lead federal agent stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Chloe, who was sitting near the corner of the table. She looked like she was about to physically be sick. "Ma'am, we have already secured your internal email servers," the agent stated coldly. "We highly recommend you start explaining your exact role in this cover-up." Chloe completely shattered. She did not even try to hold the line. The professional sycophant instantly turned on her master to save herself. She burst into violent, hysterical tears, pointing a shaking finger directly across the table at Marcus. "He made me do it!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and echoing wildly. "Marcus ordered me to draft the suspension. He said if I did not create a fake trail to get rid of the security team, he would fire me and ruin my career. He just wanted to protect Julian." The entire room erupted. The oldest, most senior board member stood up, his face entirely red with fury, and slammed his fists onto the table. Right then and there, without a formal vote or a transition period, he loudly declared that Marcus Thorne was immediately stripped of his title and permanently removed from the company premises. Marcus collapsed into his chair, utterly ruined. Meanwhile, the 2 other agents walked briskly around the table and grabbed Julian by the arms. The arrogant, untouchable heir began to sob openly like a terrified child as the cold, steel handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. They read him his rights, charging him with multiple counts of willful negligence and federal data fraud. I simply stood there and watched as they marched him out of the room, his expensive white sneakers dragging across the carpet. In the chaotic aftermath, the remaining board members turned their desperate, pleading eyes toward me. They offered me an immediate promotion to Chief Information Security Officer. They promised to double my salary, offering massive stock options and complete unquestioned control over the entire engineering division if I would just stay and help them fix the disaster. I looked at the terrified executives, then at the empty chair where the Chief Executive Officer used to sit. I gave them a small, polite smile. "No, thank you," I replied softly. "This architecture is beyond saving, and I do not clean up radioactive waste." I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom. I strode down the long hallway, pushed through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, and stepped out into the bright, warm Texas sunlight. I took a deep breath of fresh air, leaving the burning corporate empire completely behind me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a Washington, District of Columbia area code. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. I smiled. telling the United States Attorney's Office that I was officially accepting the position of Senior Investigative Advisor they had offered me last week. The game was finally over, and the board was completely cleared. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would really love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments. Also, if you found today's revenge story satisfying, please consider helping our team out with a donation of just $1. You can easily scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the donation link provided in the description and pinned comment below. Your support is the only thing that allows us to pay our dedicated staff, help them feed their families, and keep bringing you these incredible stories. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.